I'm Teacher Lisa, your ESL video instructor. Today's lesson is about narrative tenses. When we are telling a story, we are often using different tenses. Past simple, continuous tenses, the perfect tenses. So today's lesson, we're going to look at telling a story and why we use particular tenses when we are telling a story. Often that story is something that happened in the past, something that already happened, and we might think everything should be in the past simple tense, but that's not the case. So let's look at some reasons why we are not always in the past simple tense when telling a story. Narrative tenses. So let's take a look at what we really mean when telling a story, even if you're just talking about something that happened recently. You need to use a variety of tenses so that the story can be understood easily. And that's why we're not just going to use the past simple tense. So we do use different tenses to show when past actions or states overlap, or to say which took place first, because we have many events happening before other events. That's the reason why we can't just use past simple. So let's look at all the tenses that we can use when we're telling a story. So here we have the past simple tense and we have the example. So you should know past simple is when something finished at a specific point in the past. It's completed and it's over. So for example, we can say last summer we flew to London. There's so much to do there. So we flew there. We arrived, it's a completed action, simple past tense. Now let's look at the next example where we start to use the past continuous tense. So why do we use the past continuous tense? Because it describes an action that began before and possibly continued after another past action. So we have two actions in the past, and we need to indicate that one happened before the other. So let's look at our next example. While we were walking around the city, we took some photos in front of Big Ben. So we have that continuous tense and we use that ing to show that it's a past continuous tense. Of course, we have were in past and then the walking in ing. It lets us know that while we were doing this, walking around the city, we took some photos in front of Big Ben. And took is just a completed action. We took it, it's over. But we're showing that one event happened before the other. Let's look at this little note because I like that it says we often use the simple past and the past continuous together to say that one action is interrupted another or a longer one. So one action interrupted another one. So we have two events happening, but one interrupts another. While we were walking, what happened? We stopped to take photos. So that's why we can't simply just use the past simple tense. Then we have one more tense to consider, and that's the past perfect tense. The past perfect describes an action or state that happened before something else in the past. So remember, past continuous, we talked about an interruption. One thing happened and then another thing started. But with past perfect, one thing happened before the other. So for example, fortunately, we had looked up all the best places to go beforehand. So what happened, right? We looked all the places up before we went on that trip. So this action happened before something else in the past, which is the trip abroad. So the past perfect is used. Before one thing happened, another thing happened. So it's not one thing interrupting another thing. One thing happened before. We know we are in the past perfect tense when we use had. So as soon as you see had, and then we have the past form of the verb, we know we're in the past perfect tense. So we will get some practice with this. So let's move forward. So here you can just pause the video, go ahead and put your answers in, and then I'll go over the answers with you if you would like to pause the video. So what you need to do is fill in the gaps by putting the verbs in the past simple or past continuous. So we're just going to deal with these two tenses. And remember why we use one or the other. Past simple, it's completed. We might do past continuous if one action is happening, then another action starts happening, but they're both in the past. Example, we have here, we were flying over France when we saw the Alps for the first time. So we have the past continuous because what happened? Then we had the next action that we saw the Alps. So one thing was happening and then another thing was happening, and they're both in the past. Okay, so let's look at number one. We have the verb given to us, so we have to change it. I, down this road when someone, me to take their photo. So what can we say? So I'm just going to type in the answers here. So I was walking. Let's use just a black here. I was walking down the road when someone. So what do we need here? It's just an action that happened in the past. It was just asked me to take their photo. So while I was walking, I need that past continuous. And remember, we have was or were, and then we have the ing. Number two, someone was talking during the tour until we told them to be quiet. Remember, we often use these two forms, past simple and past continuous, in the same sentence. One thing happened before the other. Three, I stopped twice to take photos while I was driving. I was driving through the country. So remember, it's not that the past simple has to always be second in the sentence and we have to start it with past continuous. No, we have to think about the action because what's happening? Well, while I was driving, then what happened? Then I stopped to take photos. Number four, we to order some champagne while we lunch. We decided to order some champagne while we, what do we need? We're eating. That's what was happening. We're eating. We were eating. And remember, the were or the was is agreeing with the subject. So we say were because we have we were. If it was I would say I was. So that were or was needs to agree with the subject. Let's look at our last one, number five. We were lost and our feet before we finally, a map shop. So let's look at the verbs there. Our feet were aching before we finally found a map shop. Great. So how'd you do? Hopefully you got 100%. Okay, let's clear the board and move on. Now here we're going to practice the past perfect tense. So we're just going to go ahead and type them in. Let's look at our first example. So remember how we formed the past perfect tense? We have had, that's how we know we're in past perfect, and then we're going to have the past form of the verb. So let's look at the examples here. Our friend told us the city tour was great, so we went on in. We went on it. Okay, excuse me. So let's look at that next sentence. We went on the city tour because our friend had told us it was great. So what we're doing is we're just taking this piece here and we're putting it into that past perfect tense. So we're given that verb told and had told. So let's go ahead and do our next four, and remember to pause the video. 1, we walked all around the city and my feet really ached by the end of the day. My feet really ached by the end of the day because we had walked all around the city. That does happen. When you're walking all over the city, your feet will ache. So we have had and then past form of the verb walked. Next one, number 2, we spent a long time planning the trip and it was perfect. Okay, let's rewrite that. The trip was perfect because we had spent a long time planning it. Okay, remember why we use past perfect. One thing happened before another thing in the past. Number 3, we crossed over the wrong bridge and got completely lost. We got completely lost because we had crossed over the wrong bridge. That's unfortunate. All right. It's not fun getting lost. Number 4, our tour guide recommended a great show, so we went to see it. So we're going to just rewrite that, use past perfect. We went to see a great show because our tour guide had, we need the had, recommended, past form of the verb, recommended it. Right. Great. So how'd you do? Hopefully you're getting the idea of how to use the past perfect and why we use the past perfect. Okay, let's move on. Okay, now we have another tense, the past perfect continuous tense. So first, let's take a look at what it is. So here we have a nice description that you use the past perfect continuous to describe an action or activity that was happening before another moment in the past. So for example, he had been learning English for 2 years before he went to London. So let's look at the structure here. Had been learning. Well, let's look at how we form the past perfect continuous. So we have a subject, then we have had, so that's how we know. But what's interesting with the past perfect continuous is we add been. Then we have the ing, and then the rest of the sentence. So that's how you form it. And why do we use that? Why do we use that? Let's go back again. It's to describe an action or activity that was happening before another moment in the past. And that's how we indicate that. So let's take a look here at some example sentences. So go ahead, pause the video and see if you can do them. Let's look at our example. They had been flying for ages, so she decided to walk around the aisles. Let's try our first one, number 1. We had been, because that's what we have to always use when we're doing this past perfect continuous. We have had, but we need the been. And then the ing, waiting for at least an hour when the taxi finally arrived. Number 2, I eventually went to the pharmacy because we have had not been feeling well, because we have to make this negative here, had not been feeling well for days. Number 3, we went to see the movies because they had been promoting. Had been promoting it for months. And the last one, the streets were beautiful and white because it had been snowing all night. So we have had and been, and then the ing, snowing all night. So how'd you do? Also, I hope you got 100%. So in our next video, we're going to discuss giving advice and opinions. See you in the next video.